Welcome back to the Quest for Success podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in once again. Today, we're really looking forward because we have a friend of the show joining us today, Michelle Knox. Michelle, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so Michelle, I think, I don't know, you remember, very first time we met, that was probably in 1991, I believe. I visited Michelle's house and then you came to visit her, so that's a long time ago, at least 33 years ago.
Yeah, that was back when we were at university up at Newcastle, yeah.
That's right, yeah. And so Michelle, how do I introduce Michelle? Michelle is a part-time change manager, but full-time traveler. And also Michelle's done multiple adventurous things. And one of the kind of highlight, I guess, is being on TED Talk. And so, we all watched. And so can you give us a better introduction to yourself, please?
Yeah, certainly. So I've obviously known Jamata for a very long time and Dylan since he's been born. So I would consider myself a long-time family friend.
Yeah.
And someone who, unlike most people might be on this podcast, has lived a very different life to the average. And I now pride myself on the fact that I've done that, maybe not all the way through. So I am someone who will openly admit that I work to live and my passion in life is travel, and it was a passion I identified quite early in life. And I have managed to find a way to incorporate a career in transformation and change whilst supporting my habit of wanting to go overseas or even around Australia as much as I possibly can.
Yeah. So talking about traveling, how many destinations that you've been to? I mean, countries?
So I've actually just clocked up 95.
Wow.
But I compare myself to people who've done like 120.
So how many countries in the world? Sorry for my ignorance.
We actually just recently did a look into this. There's several ways people look at it. It can include principalities and under various rules. But I think there's somewhere above 147. But it depends on how you do the cut.
Wow! So you've done like almost 2/3 or close to.
From what I think is what I consider the majority of countries that should count in that list, and that includes things like Vatican City, Monaco. So from that perspective, I've done quite a few, and I am getting to the hairy part now, where I'm down to countries that are a little bit more either challenging to get to or require a bit more effort, and there's security issues as well. So my ambition is to get to 100. I had a plan that I'd like to do one for every year of my life. I believe I'm going to live till about 86. That's a decision I've made.
Yep,
so,
of course.
But 86 is like, well, I've hit that now, so let's just go for the century.
Wow.
That's awesome. And Michelle, so I know you've listened to a few of these episodes, but our opening tradition is we like to understand really what success means to you. So I want to start on that. Right now, what does success mean to you?
Success for me is a journey, and in this life, it will end with my eulogy. And at that point, success will be someone who knows me getting up and talking about my life and how I lived it to its full potential and I didn't waste a moment, and I tried new things. I constantly learned. I constantly look to find joy and happiness and help others. So for me, it's how I'll be measured at the end of my life. So it's a journey, and it's about living your true self, being authentic. And I personally think it's also about how you do that with having a positive impact on other people as well.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's a nice way to describe your success. So, Michelle, in terms of traveling, let's go back to traveling because this is something that you're very passionate about. Is that something that the traveling kind of interested you when you were young, or like what made you decide, well, this is what I want to do?
Yeah, so when I was 13, my father was born in Northern Ireland, Belfast, Northern Ireland. So I grew up knowing that Dad had a different accent, but really not understanding too much about his background. Obviously, Northern Ireland was going through quite a tough time with the Troubles and challenges. So when he came to Australia in the 1960s, he made the decision that he was here for a better life. So he didn't bring up a lot of the negative side of Ireland at all. But when I was 13, he took my mum and my sister and I over to meet his family. So he was one of 10. He had a sister living in the US and the rest living in either the UK or Ireland. So we did an 8-week trip starting in the US, so starting in New York, New Jersey, going down to Washington, DC, then over to tour around England, Ireland, Scotland and Wales, and then home via Disneyland and Hawaii, which was like the little bonus at the end. And I remember driving through, my sister's 5 years older than me, so she was 18 at the time, and we were driving through the Highlands of Scotland. And I was just mesmerised. It was raining, it was dreary, but it was so beautiful. It was just such amazing scenery. And then I started to just meet these amazing people along the way and other travellers, and it really kicked off something in me that I've never lost. Yeah. So my sister came home and went, well, that's great. I've travelled now. I've done that, and I'm just going to settle in Australia and enjoy life. And I was like, I want out. I want to get out of here again as soon as possible. So I went through school, finished university, and then at 21 I went overseas and did back then what was first Kentucky tour. Wow. So I was quite nervous travelling on my own. So this was a way of actually seeing a little bit of the world with other people, and that just again set it all off for me. Yeah. I'm never more energised than when I'm travelling.
Yeah.
Or talking about travel.
You feel the same way, like even when you started traveling and even now, like 92nd or 93rd trip you've been, you feel the same when you're traveling? You get that excitement?
Absolutely. I always there's always a little bit of nervousness when you leave, and you're walking into a country where you don't speak the language and you're going to have to put yourself out of your comfort zone. But if I look back when I started traveling in the 90s, we didn't have the technology to support us back then. Yeah. If you had to be somewhere, you had to look it up on a map and make sure you got there. You had to talk to people. You had to go speak to people to ask questions. And sure, I've had some challenges along the way and bad things happen. We all have. But ultimately, the one thing I think stands true for my experience of travel is I have witnessed the best in humanity for the most part. I've seen kindness from strangers. I've been kind to strangers. You can trust people that you've never met in a moment to help you in a situation. And now it's a lot easier because we use our mobile phones. But one of the things I will say is that being able to actually just go up and talk to a total stranger and get to know them, even if it's a 5-minute conversation, you can learn so much.
Yeah, you get to appreciate more on other people, their cultures, and you can't do that when you're going through the internet and looking for, a different destination or
that's correct.
Not the same, right?
Yeah. And also I'd say now we see a lot of travel influencers and those who are influencing and putting up the beautiful shots of the beautiful areas, but what you're not seeing is going and having a meal with a local or eating in a local restaurant or just seeing the local farmers and talking to the locals. That's the true travel experience that you should be seeking out when you do go overseas.
Yeah, for sure. And with a lot of this travel, are you doing it mostly by yourself or do you go with other people? How do you travel?
I've done a combination of many things. I'm largely a solo traveller.
Yeah.
I am single, so if I do want to travel, I've got to make the effort myself to go. I have over the past travelled with friends. The best friends that I've probably travelled with are the ones I've met travelling.
That's awesome.
So that would be my advice to anyone is to say if you meet someone travelling and you get on really well with them, then do other trips with them because you've already worked each other out and you know how to travel. I tend to do a combination of solo travel and then meeting up on a tour, like I do use a company, it's an Australian-based company I've used quite a bit called Intrepid. So if they're listening and they want to get a discount on the next trip, they can go right ahead. And the reason is I love eating a meal with people. So if I'm traveling on my own, that's probably the toughest time is eating. Because
Absolutely.
it's hard to just walk up to other people who are enjoying their meal and say, can I join you? It does happen, but it's not as common. So by traveling in a group of like-minded people where some of the logistics is taken out of it for you, you can just sit down and really just enjoy where you're going and then do some independent stuff outside of that.
Yeah, you feel like pretty awkward sometimes eating alone, like, and then the thing is, right, so you don't want to disturb someone and same time, when we see people alone eating, getting that person into a conversation, the current situation it's very, very complicated thing, right? Like normally, I mean, if you're alone in a country and if someone come and talk to you, that's an amazing thing, right? So, but people are a bit reserved at the moment, I mean, I've seen even going to Sydney with few mates and you see a single guy or a female, like, sitting there, having a drink, and you're a bit hesitant to go and talk to that person because you don't know whether they're open to have a conversation. And I mean,
it's becoming a dying art, I think. Yeah. And even in like my generation, I know, especially with social media and things like that, people are turning away from real social interaction and going through the safer route. If I can message a friend, I'd much rather message a friend than go and go and talk to them or call them on the phone, which is so sad. But it's just, I don't know, it's something that we've been brought up around, I think.
It is, and I've definitely seen that transition, particularly for the generation that follows me, is I see the use of a smartphone as enabling efficiency. However, true friendships and true relationships come from having a face-to-face conversation with people. And I don't think that will ever be replaced. And I'll just give a quick example. So on my way home, I went to, my last trip was just in Malta and Sicily, but I flew out of Milan. And I had to get the train back to the international airport. And when I got to the train station, it was a Thursday night, peak hour, and the train to the airport was cancelled.
Oh.
And there's just a massive amount of people standing around on their phones with luggage. And I was like, first of all, I don't know when the next train's going to be, and I've certainly no idea. There's 24 platforms on this station. And where do I need to go? I ended up going up and chatting to a security guard. Now, first of all, I have to speak in Italian and ask, can he speak a bit of English, which he could. And then he just said to me, regardless of where this train, it's always going to go on platform 1. So just go over to platform 1, where I just watched everybody else stand around and look at their phones for the next, waiting on the app for it to register. So I was already standing over on platform 1, keeping an eye on everything. And then a few other people came over, and it also, they were looking at me. We weren't on our phones, and they said, are you here for the Airport Express? And I'm like, yes, I am.
Yeah, people are too scared to talk to each other, right? Like it's really sad, like, the phone's supposed to connect us, actually disconnecting us, right?
That's right. Yeah. And that's why I think it is important to, particularly why I love these trips, is when you eat with other people, none of us had our phones out. It's great because often when you're traveling, you don't have Wi-Fi, then you can't talk anyway because you've got to put the phone away. So I do feel that's a bit of a lost art for the generation behind me, and I hope that you'll push through and come for your comfort zone and learn how to have a conversation with people. That's why travel, I think, it does that to you. It helps you.
Definitely. Yeah. And, when you are doing this solo travel, do you feel like you learn more about yourself when you go by yourself?
Yeah, you do. You learn what your boundaries are on a few things. You learn how much you can actually do on your own. You're constantly testing yourself in new and interesting ways. And each day is like a new thing. Like you learn, how do I get from here to there? How do I find a way through? Another example, in Milan, I made a decision at the last minute through someone else recommending this to me to go to the theatre at La Scala, which is a beautiful opera.
All right.
That was built in I think 1878 or something. So it's this absolutely beautiful theatre. And it houses a couple of thousand people. And let's just say I got the last ticket to the show. So I had what would be the worst seat in the house, which is in a box right above the orchestra pit and with an incredibly limited view of the stage on a stool. Yeah. And I was in this box with 3 other people who I've never met. And they were 3 women from Chile.
All right.
And they spoke Spanish and they spoke a little bit of English and I speak a little bit of Spanish. And it was a mother and 2 daughters. And after 5 minutes of conversation, I was practically invited to sit on the mother's lap so I could view the stage as much as they could. So I can't explain the small box, but we had such a beautiful time. I was able to take some photos and video. Probably shouldn't have done that, but it was a ballet we were watching, and it was really beautiful. And send that to them, and then we had a little conversation on WhatsApp afterwards. And I felt I wasn't there on my own. I wasn't. I was there, part of this family, and it's because I've learnt that little bit of Spanish and made them feel comfortable as much as they made me feel comfortable. So that's what I mean about, though. It's genuinely, you hear about pickpockets and muggings and various things, all and they're there. Yeah. They're there. They're there. They impact everyone or can. But ultimately, I've often just gone up to a total stranger and said, I just need to go to the bathroom. Can you mind? I never give them my passport, but can you mind my bag? Absolutely. Other travellers are going to do that for you. Nice. So it's having that faith in humanity and just the joy of learning about other people.
Yeah. So just the continuation on your journey of like traveling, I mean, you've been to so many destinations, not normal person would do it. When I say normal, average person wouldn't do. Any, I mean, you probably have a lot of highlights, right, throughout the journeys that you've been to. Anything that come to your mind, like this is like something that I want to share, like, over the years, like, or a destination that you kind of never expected this, like something wowed you.
Yeah, I've got quite a few. I mean, I love nature, so traveling through Africa and doing wildlife parks and seeing wildlife in the wild is extraordinary. And I'm always energized when I'm around wildlife and nature, absolutely energized. But I think one, because I have the opportunity to call it out, was I have actually been to Syria and did an overland through the Middle East before we went into Africa. So I've even camped overnight in the Syrian desert one night. But our first stop there was Aleppo, and this was 2005, so this is before the war. And the reason why I want to bring that out is at the time this was when I think things were starting to kick off in the Middle East a little bit. And I wanted to call out that I met some of the most amazing, beautiful people in that country. We were invited into a mosque in Damascus, and as women, that's back then, then we were robed up a little bit like Jedi Knights to go in, but we were escorted in and shown around and shown great hospitality. And at the time, I would say even Syria was going through its own challenges, but we met the most amazing, beautiful people along the way. And ever since then, I've always wondered what's happened to them. Did they survive? Because their life has been completely destroyed as we know it. And it still sits in the back of my mind that, these are people who showed absolute kindness and were very caring and deserve a better life than probably the one they've ended up with now. So I'm always mindful of that when I've been somewhere that has now then become a complete war zone since then. So that's unfortunately the nature of many things. So what I would say to people is always be mindful of the fact that when we see things on the news, that behind this is just decent human beings just trying to live a very basic life. I mean, what we see is the 10% or the outlying of that.
Yeah.
I mean, it can be so overshadowed, right?
Yeah.
You only see the worst of the worst. And, even when you travel to these places, a lot of the locals want to show you the real country because they know what the outsiders are seeing and they know how bad their publicity is. And as you said, they show you the real part, the real humanity in these countries. And I think that's really special.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I recall, like, I had the best baklava and the best falafels in Syria. So they're really great food as well. But as I said, it's kind of gone off the radar in recent years, and we don't really know how people are over there at the moment. But they've gone through a lot, and I'm just mindful of that. But outside of that, it's always just, when I travel, it's being the joy of those random encounters with people, with locals. That's what I love. It's just things that aren't planned.
Yeah. And, we've talked about interesting places, but I want to go to that connections piece. Is there anyone or any people that you've met who just stick with you, that you often think back to, that they've left such a big mark on you?
Yeah, and one of them was our guide we had in Syria. We went up to, I never say this correctly, but Kraktashevis, which was the Knights of the Round Table in the Crusades, ended up in this place. And he talked about how beautiful the acoustics were in this, and he actually did some Islamic chanting for us, which was just absolutely beautiful. And I think we all felt that spiritual connection in that moment for when he did that. In other travels, most recently, earlier this year, I went to South Korea and had the opportunity to stay at a Buddhist monastery for the night, and we had tea with the head monk. And through a translator, he asked us to ask any sort of questions. And I follow a Buddhist path, so I was probably more the one who kept asking more questions than the rest of the group. But I asked him through the translator what brought him to become a Buddhist monk, and he actually very openly admitted that he tried to commit suicide in his early 20s because he was very unhappy with life. And I wasn't expecting that openness as an answer, and just really getting that connectivity of him as a human and his journey and where he saw himself going. And even most recently, I was in Malta, and I just spent the day learning about Maltese history, which is actually quite extensive. Goes right back to the Byzantine and the Romans and the Hellenistic period, and then right up through to World War II. And I was in this small restaurant, and they offered two very traditional dishes, one being a rabbit stew and one being a seafood stew. And I haven't had rabbit since I was a kid, and I didn't like it back then, but I was intrigued. But being on my own, it's like, well, I'm going to pick the meal I'm probably going to most enjoy. However, a group came in behind me, and I could tell from their accents they were two Australian women, and I knew they'd ordered the rabbit stew. So at one point I did actually get up and turn around and ask them how was the stew. And I got chatting, and they were two daughters with their 93-year-old mother who had come back to Malta to say goodbye to her siblings that were still alive. It was her last trip. And that for me was very emotional, just hearing that. And I'd worked out that she would have been living in Malta during World War II. So I asked her, what was that like? Because I just learnt the history that day, and I just wanted to find out. And she actually told me of a story where her and her brothers were shot at in the field by paratroopers while they were trying to plant onions, and they used to have to plant onions at night. Wow. And as she was telling me this, it was obviously obvious. It was the first time her daughters had heard this story as well. And they're like, what? You never told us this. We don't know this story. And it's just those little random encounters of, living history. Yeah. Actually putting something behind it. And then, for her, then moving to Australia straight after getting married and starting a new life, and how that was. They're the extraordinary encounters I really appreciate about travel.
Yeah. And I mean, even what you said, we did one episode with Jam's dad, Nimal. And in Jam's conversation with him, he learnt that he was, a Buddhist monk. He learnt so many things that he didn't know. And it's almost about, you just have to ask the question, right?
Yeah, you just got to get in the right moment. I would clarify also, while I asked about the rabbit stew, they actually gave me some to try, and it was great. So if you ever go to Malta, try the rabbit stew. It's not too bad.
So, at the beginning you said you work to live.
Yes.
Right. And we both read a book called Die with Zero, where he talks about investing in, like, looking at experiences as investments, because, through our discussion, even now, clearly these are memories which have stuck with you for so long and will continue to. And it's an investment that you've made to go over and have these trips. But in the book, he talks about they pay memory dividends. You know, you talking about your experiences now brings back those experiences and you get to almost relive them. Is that one of the reasons that you enjoy or you invest so much of your life into traveling?
Yeah, I think so. And I actually, if you think about where you get your energy from, my energy comes from constantly learning, constantly experiencing new things and testing the skills that you don't even think about. It's like how to solve a problem, not from a mathematical equation point of view, but a logistical problem in your day right now. A crisis has occurred, your flight's been cancelled or something's. How are you going to solve this in the moment? What action are you going to take? And are you at the same time going to help others or be quite selfish about what you learn? So it's really keeps you on your toes. You're constantly learning. Whenever I travel to a country where English isn't the first language, one of my rules is to always learn my manners. You should always know your manners, to how to be polite, say thank you. Thank you exists in every language as a word. So I've probably learned it in many along the way, and just even small social customs. So I found I spent 12 days in South Korea. It's a country that is incredibly polite, and they have just learning to say thank you. But they also have some little social nuances about how they hold their hands when they're handing you something that you start to realise as I was mastering just the simple word of saying thank you. Yeah. And I got obviously better with the slight accent. I guess they felt I'd been there longer, and I started to see the gestures get stronger in how they held their hands as showing respect to me. And I thought that's really, really beautiful, very subtle but very beautiful, and I think that's really important as well. I always remind myself I'm a guest in someone's country. They're hosting me, and I'm going to try and be as model traveller as I possibly can, which is just being respectful and mindful of what is the right protocols to conduct yourself with while you're there. Sometimes it's around dress, it's around mannerisms, it's around whether you can speak loud. Like in Italy, they speak very loudly and with hands, and that's encouraged. But in South Korea, it's more softly, and you don't speak openly. If you're on a train, you kind of sit quietly and you read your book. So it's those sorts of things to sort of understand about what's the most appropriate way to behave.
Yeah. So any country, Michelle, you thought, well, I want to go more than once?
Just about every country I'd love to go back to. There's very few. I do actually have a ranking, and I feel bad for this one. At the bottom of my ranking is Venezuela, and it's unfortunate because I look back at the photos and I did some absolutely amazing things, saw amazing wildlife, Angel Falls, incredible. But I really struggled, and if I think about where that country is at the moment, this is probably why. It's a country that's got some serious internal challenges going on, and everyone they're fighting for their own survival and existence. So what I did find there was I just come out of Colombia and went into Venezuela, and the people in Colombia were really, really friendly and helpful and lovely. And in Venezuela, I found everything challenging, and I ended up having everyone's out for what they can get. So you had to put a different mindset on. It wasn't about love and kindness. It was suddenly about survival. And I also remember the mosquitoes being relentless. So I think that didn't help, just constantly they bite through jackets and clothing and sleeping bags. So you're like, constantly being attacked. So, but I would go back anywhere. I really would.
So in terms of ranking wise, what are the top countries?
I don't actually have one. I love, if I think of things like Switzerland is just so outstandingly beautiful. Africa's got the most amazing wildlife. I just went to Malta for the first time, love the history, love being anywhere in a European town where there's a little bell tower and a market square and you can smell fresh strawberries and see a little river running through. I'm more drawn to historical European cities or nature. Yeah. Anywhere in nature, I'll be like Canada, New Zealand, Australia as well. We've got some stunning places here as well.
Yeah. And on that point, when you come back home, do you think your travel shapes you when you return?
Absolutely. We've all been in situations where we're having a conversation with family and friends and they're complaining about the weather, they're complaining about our social systems or the government or whatever. I go, guys, we are so lucky. Every single time I land, and I landed last Saturday, I just fly in and coming in, usually we're flying in at dawn. So you're seeing the sunrise over a little part of Australia, and I just look down and go, I'm so lucky to live here.
Yeah, absolutely.
I really am.
Yeah, we all feel the same. Yeah, we realizing everything that we have, it's amazing. Yeah. So Michelle, when's the Michelle's travel guides gonna be available?
Look, I've been blogging for a long time. Recently, it's turned into just like mini Facebook posts that I have promised myself one day I am going to sit down and write the book. And I've already like worked out a couple of chapters. There's bits in there that I just try and things like stories around fights that happen over the Travelator toaster. In the hotel, things I've seen happen over that. It would be a witty book when I do write it, with some obviously some beautiful little stories entwined, because I've kept travel diaries from way back when I travelled in Nepal in the 90s. And I'd like to call out that one, because when I did that, I was in a group of all males hiking for the first time. So I was the only female in my group, and I was January, and I ended up camping in a tent in, up in the Himalayas, and it was cold, and the sleeping bags were designed for someone who was 5'2" and I'm 5'7". So there's a lot of learnings I got from that. But I've seen friends recently go to Nepal, and they're up in Namchi's Bazaar, and I'm like, hang on, there's shops. Well, there were those shops when I was there. There's a runway with tarmac on it. That wasn't the case. And so I've got all these wonderful stories from back then about what it was really like to. And I feel that sense of pride now to say I really did it when it was hard yards.
Yeah. And how do you feel about that? Like all of these untouched places now becoming a little bit more commercialized and easy for people to access. Because for me, even the Blue Mountains, a place that I absolutely love, they're adding more tracks, more ways to make it more accessible, which I understand, but also takes away some of the beauty and the raw like power of it for me.
Look, absolutely. And I think it's partly because the population is continually growing and tourism is becoming I had this discussion when I was recently away. When did tourism become a thing in the world? So the 1800s basically is when it started to kick off. And that was with the French and the British colonialism, bringing stuff to the world. So it is interesting that now we've got that whole new social, so travel influencer and social media. And I've seen it in the last couple of years, the people who go to like Mykonos and they'll take these, Instagram shots that are just by this stunning. So there's so many other things to look at and do. So I'm someone who isn't going to post. I always post the real stories, and for me, it's about the food. But it doesn't require the lighting or making everything look fake. Because in amongst all that, there's the grit of a city. There's the heat of a city. There's the reality that you have to walk up 1,000 stairs to get to that location, or it's really windy for a reason. So I think it's a little bit unfortunate, and I think Dylan, you and I are the same, where we love solitude and peace. So if we want to climb up the top of a mountain, we want to be there on our own. So we're just going to go to the other peak.
Yeah, exactly right.
That's what we're going to do.
Same. Even down in Kosciuszko now, they've built like a full boardwalked track up to the top, and for me, it's lost its appeal now. But I want to take a bit of a left-hand turn. We've talked about it at the beginning. You have done a TED Talk, which is an amazing feat, and it's about death.
Yes.
Which for many people is a very confronting topic, but you provide, an alternative view to that and say we should be talking more about death to prepare for it and remove kind of the stigma around it. And it's a fantastic talk. We'll definitely put a link in the show notes. But I want to hear about the journey that kind of led to that talk.
Absolutely. So part of my career, I was working for Westpac in banking and finance. So I have a change transformation background of my career. That's what sustains my travel habit. And 8 years ago, or 7.5 years ago, my father passed away from a progressive illness called pulmonary fibrosis. And we knew that he was sick for quite some time, but we were very fortunate that in November 2016, he was still out travelling with Mum in his Pajero 4-wheel drive, and then he passed away in the February 2017. So in the end, it was a very short palliative care component. But during that time, I'd had some very open and honest conversations with my dad, going through his advanced care directive, understanding his wishes around end-of-life care. He wanted to be at home. He really wanted to die at home. Mum and I were prepared, and my sister as well, were prepared to do what we could to help support that. There's a lot of logistics that go into that kind of care, and a lot of things you don't know until you have to go through it in turn, in understanding all the different services that have to get involved and getting the right equipment into the house. And he was on oxygen. There's a lot of rules around having oxygen in the house. You can't have birthday candles. You can't light a candle. You can't smoke a cigarette because you'd blow up the house. So there's a lot of things you need to learn. And through that, I didn't appreciate that other people don't have those conversations. Other people shut down in this moment. And it was really hard, but I faced into it with Dad. So afterwards, when my dad did pass, he got his wishes. He passed away peacefully at home. And then we honoured him with the celebration of life that he wanted. And at the same time, I had several colleagues at work who also lost a parent. So within a 6-month period, I think we lost 5.
Oh, wow.
And one of my colleagues lost both his parents 6 weeks apart. So it was quite a tough time. But we were supporting each other and we were having conversations. And I actually went to a funeral 1 week to the day after my dad's funeral, and it was a Greek Orthodox funeral. And a colleague of mine very subtly rang me up and said, "Michelle, I understand you've just lost your own father and you might be going to this funeral." And I said, yes. And my dad's was a celebration of life, so we all wore colour. So she just said, "I just need to let you know, Michelle, you're going to have to wear black if you go. Don't wear any colour at all. The respectful thing for this culture is to wear black." So I was very grateful that somebody told me that, because I probably would have turned up with black, but I would have turned up with like a red jacket or a green jacket, which would have just been like, everyone would have stared at me. Everybody in that church was in black, entirely in black. So I started to realise that I would have known this if someone hadn't have told me. And you're right, it's all about showing respect to the person who's passed or their family. It's not about what you want. In that moment, it's about what's the right thing to do by them. And then a few months later, we had the opportunity. It was Westpac was celebrating its 200th anniversary as Australia's longest serving business. And they partnered with TED to offer 15 employees the opportunity to present a TED talk about an idea they had. And at the time, my colleagues were joking, going, you should get up and do something about travel because you love talking about travel. And I went, that doesn't make a TED talk. It's got to be something that can be helpful. And it just sat in the back of my mind. You had a week to put your idea forward, and that was submitting like a 2-minute interview and a little video. And I spent all week just nutting this out in my head that if I really did actually want to put something forward. And the idea I had was, why we don't talk about death, why as a society we're not doing it, and why we should. And so I nutted it out with a couple of friends and I very intentionally went to people who weren't going to be shocked by the idea for a start. And they went, "I think that's a really great idea. I think you should do that." So I had to YouTube how to create a YouTube video, and I did that and submitted my idea. And I later on found out that I'd been shortlisted and had the opportunity. So by partnering with TED, the idea being is that you then put together your presentation, your idea, and it has to be fact checked. It's got to be. So I did a lot of research into it. And I am a storyteller, and because I've been writing about my travels, I can put a story together. So I did that, and one of the components I really wanted to put in there was ensure that I used an example of another culture outside of my own. But I chose Australian First Nations culture to sort of highlight sorry business. And another of my colleagues who was doing a TED talk was also talking about he had his Indigenous background. So I actually drafted a paragraph, and then he actually took that for me to the elders of his community. to sanity check that, and it actually got rewritten in a way that the elders would say it.
Yeah.
So when I presented that to Ted, I was very insistent that that paragraph be not edited by anyone. That had to stay because it wasn't my wording.
Yeah.
It was my idea, but it was written in the way that it needed to be said to make sense. So it was about sorry business. And so, basically I got the opportunity to present. It is something that I would say 100 hours worth of rehearsal, practice, writing, because you need to write your talk as a speech. Then you need to memorize it word for word.
Yeah.
And you need to be able to then adjust it so that you don't trip over your words partway through. And a few things triggered for Ted. So Ted being out of the US, so things like smoking ceremony, they see that as a very different thing to lighting some leaves and smoke. They think it's something to do with actually smoking a cigarette. It's like, no, you had to really educate them that has to stay there. Yeah. That's part of what it is. And then I had the opportunity to present that on stage in Sydney to an audience of 700 people live. Very daunting. Yeah. And one thing I did was ensure that I had practiced this on work colleagues. The CFO at Westpac had sat through it with me. My neighbours had come over to listen to it, family, friends. But the three people who had never heard this before was my mum, my sister and my brother-in-law. They had no idea what I was going to say. Mm-hmm. And I deliberately did that because I thought it might unnerve me if I saw my mum get upset by something I'd said. And people were coming up to my mum going, oh, it's so beautiful. You're going to love it. But she had no idea what I was going to say. And they were in the audience.
Oh, wow.
And in the actual the recording of the TED Talk, they actually feature a couple of times that I don't think the people recording it would have known. They were just randomly scanning the audience. And I know when I went and stood up on stage, I knew exactly where my mum was sitting at that moment because I could see her eyes glistening in the background. So I presented my talk, and at the end of this was meant to go no further than that 750 people. It was recorded, but it was for my benefit. And Ted announced in partnership with Westpac that my talk had been selected to go global and feature as talk of the day globally. So it's now the transcript is now in 22 languages. It did lead to a number of other podcasts that I've done or shared views on. So Mamma Mia, I've done the Pineapple Project.
Nice.
I've done TED Radio Hour as well,
cool.
just to talk about the need for it. And the crux of it is we need to be able to have conversations with our loved ones about death in a really practical way, long before anyone in our family is being told that they've got some diagnosis or something's happened. And it's to help us understand what a good death is and what a good bereavement is. So for me, I was able to grieve the loss of my father without regret, without wondering, could I have done something different? I knew exactly what I needed to do. I can't change the inevitable. Death is something we will all experience. And it's to help people just normalise the conversation and make it very practical. So I talk about it in a very practical point of view. It's not about what happens after you've passed, where you go or your afterlife. It is about what happens here in the now.
Yeah. So, Michelle, this is a really interesting conversation. It's actually a difficult conversation because I went through a similar kind of experience with my uncle, the uncle who actually helped me. I wouldn't be here without him. So about 4 months, I mean, he was living in overseas, so I traveled several times, at least 4 times in that year to stay with him. But he's a very quiet person, and I totally didn't know what to talk to him, because he was going through a cancer, and it's a terminal cancer. So, and even we try to explain, I mean, the doctors trying to explain, I don't think they directly explain this is going to kill him, but I believe that he knew that. But we didn't know really what to kind of talk to him, I was there with him. Even the day that he passed away, I was there holding his hand. And we were pretty much telling, all the things that he's done, how that helped helped us, things like that. So I want to take you to that moment, that if you don't mind,
That's
that you spend with your dad the last few moments, right? What exactly, the conversation, like, I mean, because this is a real thing for most people, right? Like, we gotta, if you haven't, like, one point that we gotta go through this, right? So, if you don't mind sharing, things that your conversation with your dad, like.
Yeah, I think what I really am very grateful for my father, because I think he initiated this by straight away accepting the fact that he knew that his time was short.
Yeah.
He knew he was in palliative care, and he said, "I want to die at home." So he gave us that hook to have the conversation. He didn't pretend it wasn't happening. He knew it was happening. That actually is, I think, very, very key, is the fact that he did that for me. So what that enabled myself and my mum and my sister to then do was look at, okay, what do we need to do to support you being at home? But the hardest conversation, and I will say it was very, very hard, is there is something in Australia called an Advanced Care Directive, which is a pack that helps you go through a number of questions, and it covers things like organ donation and do not resuscitate and these rules. And it's a guide, and as you're reading through it, it's really hard to sit with your father or anyone in that moment, because you know it's imminent, and say, what do you want done with your body after you die? And that's when I realised I went through that with Dad, and he answered everything. But if he hadn't have given me that decision, if he had have not spoken to us about anything, I probably wouldn't have had the better experience of, as I said, understanding what a good death is, and a lot of people wouldn't be comfortable with even saying that, and a good bereavement. So what I want to get people doing is Dylan, I want you having that conversation now with your family, right? Long before you need to have that conversation. I now find that I spend a lot of time in death conversations with people, but around my family and friends, it's become very normal. I know so much about what people want. People have started to think about organ donation and started to think about, actually, I don't want to be buried. I want to be cremated. I actually don't want to be, I just want to be scattered somewhere or whatever, and just getting that out there. But it's more important, I think, for my learning, is to do it before you're in that. You were in a moment of you needed to just be there and hold his hand and be with your uncle at a time when he was passing. But for me, those conversations are more helpful if they happen long before he had that diagnosis, and long before you had to face into the imminency of his passing, because it's too emotional, it's too hurtful. You were already grieving at that point. However, for those who, it doesn't mean you don't have the conversation, but it does mean saying you need to sort of find a brave moment where you can say, I want to understand, when you're not here, is there anything that you want that's important to you that I need to know? How do you want your remains to be treated? Do you want to be buried or cremated? It's okay to have those conversations with people, but I would promote having them long before we're faced with our imminent departure. Yeah.
And I think it's, as you kind of said, it's a bit of a two-way street as well. Like, if your dad hadn't have been so open about kind of starting that conversation as well, it would have been a lot harder for you. So it's kind of a two-way street where both parties have to be open to having the conversation. Absolutely.
And I will say that I still have epic failures with family and friends now around getting people to talk. And I know that we have someone who we know mutually who lost a father last year. And I do know that he listened and he took that on board. So although they were challenged to have the conversation together, I do know that he understood that, and he took what he needed to do to make sure that he took care of that in the end. And I really just encourage, I just know what it's like. And so many people have come up to me and said, I wish I'd known this, I wish I'd done that. And we don't have to go through that if we can have these conversations. So So I'm still doing work in this space. I call it my compassion project.
Mm-hmm.
So up on the 8th of August is Dying to Know Day, and
Dying to Know Day,
and it's trying to normalise conversations around death. So there's things like death cafes where you can go and build a coffin. You can do all sorts of things, but it's really, really practical. It's not actually about anyone imminently passing. It is actually about having a very practical conversation around logistics and planning. And I call it, I don't call it this, but I've adapted the term since I've heard it, is death literacy, is understanding wills, why we need a will. What happens if you don't have a will? And there's plenty of people who will be listening to this who'll have lived that nightmare of having to administer an estate that doesn't have a will, or being on the receiving end of having to go through some financial challenges because someone they love didn't have a will, and they've got to go through probate and bring in a public trustee who will take some of the money, by the way.
Yep.
So I say this in my TED talk as well, when else in the world do you give money to the government when you don't have to?
Yeah.
So for that alone, get a will.
Yeah.
Just have one,
Yeah.
once you have assets. And then also for the next generation, we have a digital footprint. So what do we do with our social media accounts? And there's a lot of things to think about as well. Online banking, the whole bit. So yeah, there's quite a bit in there. But I look at it from a very practical lens.
Yeah, definitely. And I want to go back to the beginning. You kind of spoke about, you've lived a very non-traditional life.
Yes.
Can you walk us through that a little bit?
Okay, so I'd say I'll be really honest. I'm 52. I know I look a lot younger. I'm 52. I am single. I've never been married, and I'm happy to talk openly about this. And I don't have children. I do have 2 dogs. And I grew up at a time where, growing up, born in the 70s, growing up into the 80s and 90s. So first in my family to finish year 12, first in my family to go to university.
Wow.
These weren't rarities at the time, but it still was.
It's a big deal.
But I think because of that passion of travel, I just had this instinct that a lot of my friends got married in their 20s. I think there was a 12-month period where I went to something like 9 weddings or something, and it's like everyone was getting married, and I just wasn't feeling that was at that moment, my path. I kept saying, I've got to travel, I've got to do this, I've got to do that. And I did. I've lived abroad, I've traveled. And I always, it's not that I haven't wanted to meet someone, but I've always been looking for that partner in life, that soulmate, that person that you share a journey with. And just through circumstance, it hasn't happened yet. It probably
It's still open too?
Yeah. Oh, I'm still open, but I'm a bit lazy about looking for doing anything about it. But because I'm quite content with life. But yeah, I've still have found that I am an aunt to 4 and a great aunt to 7, and I have a magnificent, beautiful role to play in their lives.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I haven't been able to get any of my 4 nieces and nephews abroad. I see that as if I had a failing in life, it's that. However, I'm now targeting the next generation. So, and I hope to have a few wins out of them to get them abroad. But what I have managed to do is I made a commitment that I would at least get all 4 I have 2 nieces and 2 nephews, and I'd at least get them all on a plane. So I took my 2 nieces many years ago to Melbourne, just so that they've been on a plane domestically. And my 2 nephews, for their 21st birthdays, they did skydiving.
Oh,
so
awesome.
I got them to jump out of a plane. Now, I've done that myself, so I would never get them to do something I wasn't prepared to do. But they've both got on a plane but exited the plane by jumping out of it. So and I think that's the only time they've been on a plane. So, I can play a really important role as an aunt. But I think getting back to the point about, I'm probably the 5% club. It's hard sometimes being out here, but as I've gotten older, I embrace it. And I like being that person who can go and do stuff. So I travel because I can.
Yeah.
And as I said, I work to travel, but I feel that for me then it's about embracing all the things I can do because of the freedom to do them.
Yeah. I have to ask this question. You mentioned earlier that you're following the Buddhist path.
Yes.
But were you born Buddhist, or what made you decide that that's the right path to follow?
Okay. No, I wasn't born Buddhist. I was born into I wouldn't. Okay, so I was raised Protestant or Church of England in Australia, but my dad is, I mentioned Northern Ireland, so I'm from a part Catholic Protestant family. So my dad had a view of religion that being a Christian is not about being a Catholic or a Protestant. It is the moral compass you come with. It's the way you behave. It's the way you should be treated. He saw probably the worst of formal religion at times, and how they use that to create war on each other, and he didn't want that for us. However, my parents sent my sister and I to Sunday school, and so I've been confirmed and have a lot of friends who are Catholic, and have spent a lot of time going to midnight mass and various things along the way. But it was through travel. Firstly, I would say it's a very personal thing, but when I was at Sunday school or going to church, I've never been more bored. It was an hour of my life that I had to endure. I was always made to wear some itchy, scratchy, uncomfortable dress and look proper. Hymns were boring. Hymns made no sense to me. The sermons were not really connecting. So I never really found what was this connection. I understood. I definitely think I've since travelled to Israel and walked in Jesus' footsteps and many other historical figures' footsteps, and I think a lot of whether it be Muhammad or Moses or Jesus, that these were extraordinary figures in history who've done, and Buddha as well, who've done some amazing things for us to be able to be held in such regard so many centuries later. So for me, though, it was travelling and an incident that happened in Cambodia through my travels in 2006. I, like many people who've gone to Cambodia, you visit the killing fields. It's a very confronting place. Like I've been to Auschwitz as well, but the killing fields, you're walking on where people were massacred.
Thousands of people.
Extraordinary. And our guide was the same age as me, and he spent time in a concentration camp under Khmer Rouge. And in that time, so this happened. The Khmer Rouge was reigning when I was alive. It was in the 70s, and he lost his father and I think his brother. So he has a mother and a sister and him that have survived that time. And at the time, he was telling me that his father was an educated man. I think he was a school teacher. He wasn't wealthy, but they killed the educated people. And his dad said to him, no matter what happens, before his dad was killed, I think his sibling died through illness or malnutrition, but his dad was killed by the Khmer Rouge. And he said that his father always said, no matter what happens, I never want you to be enraged and become as bad as these people are. You need to rise above that. You need to be a good human. And by doing that, you're going to get out of here. You're going to look after your mother, your sister, or your brother. He didn't know who was going to survive at that point. And be a better person and lead by example and live your life and never lower yourself to their standard.
Yeah.
And that for me was extraordinary. That's an extraordinary, because you have every reason to hate, every reason to hate, every reason to seek revenge. And you go there, and this probably is still there today. There is a school that you go to that was, I forget the name of it, but it was used to torture people. And there's a lot of graphic evidence in there of that. And on the walls was pictures of those who've committed war crimes, some of which at the time were still in power, in government, and they're still alive. But all their eyes had been scratched out. And I asked, what's the significance of that? And I said, that's their way of saying, we're taking away your soul. We don't want to see your soul. You're going to become nothing to us. You can't touch us that way. So the opposite. So we see good and evil, and we see love and hate. But there's an achievement of indifference where you can't hurt me anymore. And the idea of, I think, scratching out the eyes was to sort of say, I'm indifferent to you. I don't see you. I don't see you. You don't exist. And I will move on with my life. And that for me was a trigger going, I really got that. I really understood for the first time that you are completely in control of how you can feel and react to a situation. And it's a very powerful thing to be able to master. And that's why I say I'm on a Buddhist path, because I fall off that path a lot. And I have moments with people where I get very annoyed and very angry. And so for me, it's a journey, and it's about trying to live a certain way, which for me doesn't contradict any views in any other formal religion, because it's a philosophy about how you live your life. But it's one that it just resonates with me the strongest. So I do my best.
That's interesting, yeah.
So I'm not sure if you'll believe it or not, but we've been going for over an hour.
I'm sure. No, I do believe it.
But I just want to go back to the first question that we asked. And right now, do you feel like you're successful?
More so than ever, yes, because I'm living my life to the way I believe I'm supposed to live it, and I'm being true to myself, my authentic self, and following what I think is the right thing to do. So yes.
And so throughout our conversation, I've been writing down a few things which I think impact your success. And I think, you were talking a lot about success for you is the journey and being authentic and having a positive impact and always doing things. And I think one thing that contributes a lot to that is you're very open-minded. You talk about all of these different places you've been to and how you respect everyone else's culture. You love to meet new people. You're really going outside your comfort zone and having an open mind to all of these new perspectives. Whether you agree with them or not, you're always very respectful to these other cultures and things, which I think is having that open-mindedness is something that's tapering off now, because we're bombarded by all of this negative media and things like that. So people are closing off to a lot of different cultures and new experiences. So I think that's something that's very special. And I'm sure people will be able to see you're also an excellent communicator.
Absolutely.
And I think that is another very powerful thing, which we've seen throughout our conversations with people. Communication comes up time and time again. Just your ability to be in a new place and connect with people as well. And I think communication is the way that you connect with other people. And then I've also got the ability to have tough conversations.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that's very powerful. A lot of people know what they need to say, but when push comes to shove and you're in the moment, a lot of people shy away from that. And so I think having that ability to go through with it and have the tough conversation it's a very powerful thing, because you get a lot more achieved, and you're not putting up this wall and pretending you're someone else. You're being direct and saying what needs to be said. And the last one, you just mentioned it, authenticity. You are Michelle Knox, and you embrace. You're not worried about what other people think and the stereotypes of normal society. You know what you want to do, and you're living your successful life.
And you have the full control. Like, you have that freedom, that you own that freedom, right?
Yep.
And then you go for it, right? Rather than you're not just keeping any regrets behind. You just pretty much you want to do things.
Correct. And I almost now love it when someone says something to me that's like, aren't you worried about this, or shouldn't you? It's almost like, bring it on, because that's the challenge. I'm going to do the opposite of what you say, because that's who I am. So, and I think for me, and we'll know this traditionally, I'm now going into a part of my life where, I'm 52, so I'm getting older, and this is where we start seeing people we believe become more closed-minded. I'm more determined than ever to just go, well, so after this call, I'm going to hit you up about your thoughts on nuclear energy, because I need to understand where we're heading in modern times and stuff as well. I'm going to continue to be learning, and I'm going to continue to
that's an awesome thing. Like, this is what we realized. We talked to several other people throughout this podcast, and that learning mindset. You're always there to learn. Every moment, every opportunity that you see as a learning opportunity, whether it's a good or bad.
Yep.
So that's a great ingredient for success.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, Michelle, thank you so much for giving up your time and coming on the podcast. It's been
Thank
a
you
fantastic...
for letting me go over time.
No, it's been a fantastic discussion. And you mentioned you had a blog. Is that still running?
No, I'll talk to you about that afterwards. I've got to set that back up again because the platform it was on is off. But yeah, it will eventuate. Don't worry, it's coming.
Yeah.
So can people find it anywhere if they...
Not at the moment. I've got to put it back on a proper platform, but I have them all. So those who are friends with me on Facebook, and I know Facebook's a bit like, oh, people roll their eyes now. That's where it is at the moment. But it's
coming
from
soon.
friends, but it's coming soon. Yeah.
All right. Once it's up, we'll add the link.
Thank
in
you,
the
Michelle. It
description.
was amazing. It's great to have a chat. I don't think we ever had a chance to sit down and have this kind of a conversation. So after 30 something years, finally we made it. Yeah,
We have.
And on that note, if you haven't already, please give us a 5-star review and follow us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And we'll see you guys in the next episode.
Thank you.